Redditors, what was the scariest we need to leave now moment that you've ever had? So, my wife was about a month out from the due date of her first child. Something didn't seem right to her, and she wanted to go in to get checked. I immediately drove her to the hospital, and the baby's heart rate dropped really low suddenly, and they did an emergency C-section. He came out APGAR 1, 0 is death. Looked exhausted, wouldn't raise his arms, and he was in the NICU for 8 days, many of them under an oxygen hood. Right after he was born, the anesthesiologist said to us that he might be disabled. I've never been so scared in my life, worried that we would lose him. Many years later, he is in college now and perfectly healthy. Thankfully. Edit. My wife was in a room recovering for several days and was unable to see my son in the NICU. Every day I would visit my son in the room and then go visit my wife. On the third day, I brought her a framed photo of him of his first hour in this world so that she could see him from her hospital bed. She broke down in tears. On the fourth day, he was out of the oxygen hood and I got to hold him for the first time. I brought my wife down to the NICU in a wheelchair later that day and she saw him in person for the first time since his birth. When the nurse said, "Would you like to hold him?" she burst into tears again, sobbing tears of joy. It was quite an emotional time. Next story. I was in Barcelona with some friends, ended up in a pretty local bar and having a few drinks with the barman. He talked about another bar and said he'd take us in a taxi as he was finishing soon. So got in a taxi and he started to drive a long way. Started to get rural and I asked him how far, and he just laughed and said something in Spanish to the driver, who laughed as well. We stopped at a traffic light and I pushed my two and a lot drunker than me friends out of the car and told them to run. Found then another taxi driver, luckily, and jumped in. He was surprised as we were miles away from anywhere that tourists should be. He was on his way home but took us back to the city. Next story. I was there on a study abroad. Had already spent 3 months in India a few years previously, and it was the first night. All of the students were meeting at a spot for dinner for the first night, so we all hopped into Uber cars and tuk-tuks where we were staying to make the trip. I got into a tuk-tuk with 2 other girls, and I was keeping an eye on the route since it was a new city while they were chatting it up. At first, all was well, but then we took a wrong turn. The map told the driver when to U-turn. He didn't. It gave another chance to. He made no move to. I started getting that dread feeling and telling the girls that we were going the exact wrong direction, and they kept insisting it was fine and he'd turn around when he could, traffic being crazy and all of that. Well, I started gesturing to the guy that we needed to turn back, and he just waved me off. We were on a highway-like road, and remember, a big bridge, but not sure if it was like a massive road or a full highway type thing, but we were now headed the exact opposite direction towards a part of the city tourists should not go. Businesses here were already closed down or closing for the night. There were fewer lights and it was increasingly run down. And I finally started screaming that I was going to jump out because I'd rather get hit by another car than go to the second location. It was so obvious by now that he was taking us somewhere else. I started to make moves to jump and the other 2 girls began screaming. Surprisingly, the driver slowed down and let us off in the middle of the road before speeding off. I'm assuming my getting hit by a car and witnesses would have been way worse for him, but I don't know. Thankfully, there was like some sort of candy shop of a place that was just shutting down, and the woman let us come in and wait for another Uber to take us back to the restaurant. And I don't think those 2 girls ever believed me that something really bad was going down, but we'd gone about 20 minutes in the wrong direction with ample time and opportunity to turn back, and the driver was completely ignoring my protests while we were headed into a known sketchy area. Personally though, I've really enjoyed the 6 months I've spent in India in my life and have been fortunate that the scary or uncomfortable things tourists describe as common never happened to me, but that moment is up in my top 3 of scariest experiences. Next story. Not quite a leave, but I was living in Kansas. My boyfriend and I were sitting on a friend's front porch when cops came flying up the street, slammed on the brakes, and yelled, "Get the F in the house!" We did. Our friend wasn't home, but thankfully the door was unlocked. Well, it turned out there was a man walking around shooting anything that moved. We didn't know this at first. This was around 2002, so we didn't have the net in our pockets. Our friend came home maybe an hour later and told us what was going on. Not long after, there was some commotion in the backyard. It was the guy with the police on his tail. They arrested him a few feet from the back door. Next story. In high school, we were eating at a Burger King. A friend kept saying it was too hot inside, let's leave, and no one else felt like it, but she insisted. We all walked outside, and about 20 seconds later, a car smashed through the restaurant where we were sitting. Next story. I was at the fair with my wife and my 6-year-old daughter. From the moment we arrived, I had the feeling that we shouldn't be there. I can't explain it beyond a feeling of pits of despair in my stomach that was was telling me that this wasn't the place for us. I told my wife, but she brushed it off because she loves the fair. The girls were having fun and we had tickets for the monster truck show. Halfway through the monster trucks, there was an intermission and I took that moment to say, nope, we are leaving now. Not going to argue it, it's time to leave now. It was a 25-minute drive home, and by the time we arrived, it was already on the news, the local press, website, and all over Facebook that there had been a gang-related shooting at the Fairgrounds in the concessions area that we had to walk through on the way out. Huge police response, EMS, etc. It happened probably less than a minute after we had gotten to the car. We didn't hear the shots, we never told our daughters, but needless to say, my wife trusts my gut now. Edit. For those asking, the feeling started in the car and grew stronger as we approached the fair. I can say to the best of my memory, I spoke up before we even entered the gates and the feeling grew stronger over the course of the next 4-ish hours we were there. We went on rides, saw animals, ate at all the food places, etc., but as the monster truck show went on, it got to the point where I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. And one of you is correct in your guess about where and when it took place. The USA is in obvious need of more sensible gun laws. Seeing the amount of places people have said this has happened somewhere else makes me sad. Alright, so for a long time, medium time, even recent viewers for the channel, you know that we've read similar stories like this, but just there's something that we've read about where people have these gut-deep feelings that says, leave, I gotta go, this isn't the place to be, and then turns out something did happen. So I'm not surprised to see it again here in this video. I've personally never had such an instance happen in my life. Hopefully I don't need to have that gut feeling, but it's a real thing. We read about it all the time here. But anyway, next story. So we were camping. It was the dead of the night and I was sleeping. I was maybe 12 or 13, and my brother comes into my tent and whispers to me that we have to leave while picking me up. I don't question it, and I just go. We drive for a bit until he pulls over and makes a phone call. He tells the police that a man was walking around our campsite with a gun, threatening to kill us. We find out later it was his girlfriend's dad. Fun times. Next story. I've posted this a couple of times. My family was crossing the English Channel on a ferry, and it was 1979. My brother, then aged 11, and me, then aged 13, got bored sitting around a large lounge with our parents, so we wandered around looking at stuff. This guy then approached us and asked us if we were Canadian. I was wearing a t-shirt from the Canadian Embassy Club in Moscow. We said we were, and he said he was too. We chatted a bit where we were from. He looked like he was in his 20s. I can still remember his shoulder-length hair and his 70s mustache. He eventually told us that he had Canadian bumper stickers on his car, which was parked several levels below us. He invited us to go to his car and see the stickers, and we both said no. We kept chatting, and he kept trying to get us to go down and see his car. It was getting really creepy, so I grabbed my brother and said we're going to go have dessert with our parents, or some lame reason, and we told them what had happened and hung around our parents for the rest of the evening. And I couldn't figure out why he was trying to lure us to his car. I was already chesty at age 13, but why invite my brother if he wanted to essay me? We were a little young to try to sell drugs to as well. Next story. Was camping at a national park with 2 friends, 3 of us in a tent. One of those spots that you drive up to and has picnic tables and a fire pit, so it's not deep woods camping. Well, middle of the night I have to go pee, and I go out to a nearby spot and do my business, no problem. Walking back, I stop to look at the stars and light a cigarette. I'm there maybe a minute or 2 when suddenly I had a wave of what I can only describe as primal instinct. My adrenaline sharpened everything as I listened. Nothing had changed, no sounds around, but I just knew something was there and something was watching me. So I calmly put my cigarette out and walked back to the tent without any sudden movements. Got in the tent and waited, listening. There was nothing, so I figured I must have spooked myself out. Went to sleep without an issue. Well, in the morning, we found our camp absolutely destroyed. Some animal had come through looking for food, I guess, but not messed with the tent, thankfully. Even my friend's old baseball hat that he had been sweating in all summer was ripped to shreds. We found pieces of it all over the place. It had been sitting on the picnic table. Now I know to listen to my gut from now on. Next story. When my husband and I were teenagers and first started dating, we were parked in an empty golf course for some privacy. We had been to this spot before, and it was a great place to walk around at night and then make out in the car. Tonight was different, though. As soon as we pulled in, something felt wrong. I reclined my chair back to hide myself, paranoid someone was watching us. We sat for a few minutes making awkward small talk, and then I was suddenly filled with overwhelming dread and sheepishly asked if we could leave. My then boyfriend immediately obliged, a little too quickly considering the hormones of teenage boys and the plans we had to fool around. But he peeled out of the parking lot, my seat still fully reclined because at this point, I'm absolutely convinced we aren't alone. The bottom of the Honda scrapes the ditch of the driveway as we pull out in a panic. At this point, neither of us had communicated with one another what we were feeling, but this reaction was enough to know we were on the same page. We were in danger. We speed a few miles away before we broke the silence, and I put my seat back in its upright position. I tried to laugh it off and admitted I wasn't sure why I was scared. Neither of us really had an explanation for the sudden fear we both experienced, but decided not to question it too much. We found out afterwards that there was a brutal attack on a couple of teenagers walking home from the burger joint by the golf course by a schizophrenic homeless man. I'm convinced we both felt like someone was watching us because he was, and I know if we had gone on our normal late-night walk, something horrible would have happened. This happened 16 years ago, but I can still remember that fear so vividly. Next story. My father's story, not mine, but still. He was working in construction as a contractor, leading a team who were working on an old estate on a hillside. It was a clear day, weather was fine, and they were up on the scaffolding, working on the chimney. Rather suddenly, my father experiences the pressure to go down. Right now, it's a hassle, but you have to climb down the scaffolding, but he does it, and they hadn't been there up all that long, so he resisted for a bit. But it was just this tremendous push, this urging to descend ASAP, so he told his team to go down. They asked why. They didn't understand. They were in the swing of things. Why go down? And my father finally just ordered them to go down. So they went, and a few minutes later, they all stood on the lawn, looking at one another sheepishly. At this moment, completely unexpectedly, a lightning strike hits the chimney that they had been working on. When he told me the story hours later, he was still upset. Next story. It was just before Christmas. Me and my then boyfriend, now husband, had gone back to hometown to visit my family. We'd gone out for some drinks, us, mom, and my sister, and we bumped into some woman who lived on my mom's street. She insisted on inviting us to the after party after the pub kicked out. Mom got super excited, wanted to go. Sister said no and went to bed, but we were both forced/guilt-tripped into going because mom didn't want to go alone. So we get there and go in through the front door, and I immediately beeline to the back of the house, the kitchen, and just have this pit of my stomach feeling to scope out how I'm going to get outside again. And there's a set of keys next to the fruit bowl, and one of them fits in the back door. I'm saying over and over that I don't want to be here. I want to go home. Mom is telling me to mingle and relax and have fun and not ruin this for her. And husband is starting to pick up on what I'm feeling and wants to go too. Mom has just made us hold drinks and is starting to head back towards the living room though, when we head towards the front door slamming open, and a guy shouting and demanding payment for drugs, and everyone else starts shouting, swearing, and screaming. Needless to say, I was straight out the back door, followed by husband and mom. We were there for about 30 minutes total, and it wasn't until we got back to safety that I felt like I could breathe again. Next story. Not really a scary one, but this past summer, me and my family were at the fair, and this guy kept running into my grandma. My grandma was 79 years old at the time, that I might add, and we were just going through the fair, and at 3 different times throughout the day/night, this guy just kept happening to find where we were at. By the third time, we said, let's go, because this guy was clearly stalking us, or more specifically, my grandma. Why? I have no clue, but we weren't going to stick around and find out either. Oh my goodness, the naivete of this post, and OP, and the whole family. He's trying to contact her about her car's extended warranty. Duh, what else could it be? Unless he's a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness. And in that case, if he whips out the pamphlet, you better start running. But anyway, next story. So, on a trail in the Great Smoky Mountains. I can't recall the actual trail, but something like Indian Grave. And out of nowhere, we heard this noise that we thought could only be made by a large, severely injured cow. All 3 of our faces drained of color, and we booked it out of there. Later, we were sitting in a restaurant in Dollywood, and via YouTube, we found the source of the noise. A baby bear. I've never heard that noise before or since, but my heart missed a beat that day. And something deep in my animal brain knew to leave that location immediately. Next story. This was 4 years ago, right after COVID. Went to a well-known Cancun all-inclusive resort on vacation. It was super early morning, just past dawn, had the infinity pool all to myself and took advantage. So I wandered to the infinity edge, which looked out over the beach and the ocean, and I'm there at the edge enjoying the view when motion below me caught my eye. 2 guys were below me, behind the hotel sign, digging in the sand. They pulled up a box a little bigger than a shoebox, and something told me not to move, but also not to look. I shifted my gaze, feeling oddly both calm and terrified, so that I was looking at the horizon like I hadn't even noticed them. Well, my peripheral vision confirmed they stopped digging and were looking up at me. Nobody moved for a few minutes, then they went back to their work. I slowly glided backwards away from the edge, then out of the pool and swiftly back to our room. Later that morning, as drinks and loud music got into full swing, 3 police officers came and were investigating the spot that they had been digging. I am positive my ability to look like I was just a dumb tourist enjoying the view kept me from becoming a concern to them. Next story. I was staying over at a friend's house for the first time. I was around 11 or 12. Her dad took us to a gas station and I grabbed some candy and went to pay, and he got angry. Not like jokingly angry, but actually offended I was going to pay for my own stuff. After that, I felt something was off and let him pay for my stuff begrudgingly. Before night, I just couldn't shake how uncomfortable I was. I kept thinking I was super sensitive, but I still called up my parents about how uncomfortable I was and convinced them to pick me up. Come to find out, the guy was a predator and had SA'd a few of her friends during sleepovers. I found out a few months later that he had SA'd her and her little sister, and she invited friends thinking it would spare her since he would focus on her friends instead. I'm now a mom and I just feel so angry, but also I pity her so deeply. She was willing to sacrifice her friends to spare her and her sister, and has to live with that now. Next story. When I was a kid, my mom fell into a marriage with an abusive man. He never laid a finger on her while they dated, but he beat the crap out of her on their wedding night. We'll call him George. We had moved halfway across the country with him, and he made a lot of money, so my mom didn't need to work, which meant we were properly trapped. She didn't have access to his money. All we had was her car. I was about 8 years old at the time. One day, while he was at work, we packed up the car and left him behind, driving back across the country to the city we were in prior. When we got back into town, we checked into our hotel and went to sleep. Sometime the next day, we went to my mom's favorite hangout restaurant/bar spot. My brother, 17 at the time, we'll call him Matthew, was a bit psychic. I don't care if you think it's real or not, to be honest. And we were just hanging out having a good time when suddenly he knew that George was nearby. He grabbed my mom's arm and said, "We have to go now." My mom didn't want to go though, but thought Matthew was just scared, etc. He basically had to drag her out of there. We got in the car, and as we were sitting in the exit of the parking lot waiting for the traffic to pass so we could pull out, George pulled in. Terrifying. Next story. I lived in Philly for a while, around COVID times, and my job had me traveling to all different parts of the city as a job coach. I worked with folks with physical or developmental disabilities, went to their job sites to make sure they were getting accommodations, being treated fairly, and helping them build skills to work independently. Sometimes it would bring me through a part of town that it was not great to be through as a lone person, especially because I had a pretty sizable chest and hips and not a lot of height. Well, I was getting out of sight somewhere in Kensington late afternoon, and I was checking my phone for transit when I started to get antsy. I've been anxious before, cautious and all, but this was a whole new level. I was starting to shake from the dread, but the streets were pretty empty. But after a few seconds, it just seemed like I started moving involuntarily, started to walk fast away and down the street. Turns out, a guy came out of the overgrown lot I was next to and started following me, shouting at me to come to him, calling me a B-word, threatening me for being there. Luckily, I happened to pass a halal food truck, and the chef decided to jump out with a big effing knife and started yelling at the guy. The dude following me had a knife of his own, but didn't think it was worth it to pick the fight. I guess because he backed off. I was too shaken up to ask the chef his name, but he stayed out of the truck with me until an Uber came. Like hell, I was going to venture off on my own again. He didn't speak English, and I don't speak Arabic, but I know the kind of tone to know he was trying to comfort me. He even gave me a lamb gyro for the road. He saved my life. I wish I knew his name. It wasn't the only time I was saved by strangers in Philly either. I have to thank the POC community specifically for taking care of my white ass because I never got help from the white folk when it came down to it. Here's to a halal chef, street corner guys, subway ladies, shopping cart retrievers, and the one guy who caught me by the backpack so I wouldn't fall down a flight of concrete stairs when my knee gave out. They all kept me safe. Next story. 13 years ago, at the beach parking lot where everyone came to hang out as a young adult in the summer evenings, something just came over me. It wasn't dread or fear, but something just felt off. Overall, a bad feeling. I've never experienced anything like it before, but my gut told my brain that it's time to go home. And honestly, it wasn't strong enough of a feeling that I could have easily changed my mind due to my lack of fear. Not sure why, I just have never been incredibly fearful, but I said to my friend at the time that I am leaving and something feels off here. Well, I get home and less than 2 hours later, a gang shooting happened at the beach. Unfortunately, a few friends from my old high school were shot. Fortunately, they did survive. They weren't the target, just wrong place, wrong time. Luckily, I left because I was about 6 months pregnant at the time. Who knows what could have happened if I stayed. Next story. My family was living in South Sudan during the Civil War some years back. I was 11 at the time, and I remember waking up to shooting all around our house and in the village. Once it died down, the whole village left and went to the refugee camps in Uganda. We followed them and moved to Uganda as well. It was a very scary and traumatizing time. Next story. Back in college, a group of friends and I were working on our spring carnival. The night before the first day opening, we had the job of setting up several spaces and worked until like 2 in the morning putting together booths and tables and whatnot. It was crazy cold that night for the area of the country that we were in. No snow on the ground, but icy and teeth-shattering cold. We were done with our work though, and just about the only people still there at the fairground when one friend was like, "Come on in here, it's warm, let's warm up." Through the flap of a mostly sealed food tent, he said that. I went in and found a group of us drinking beer, stretched out on the tops of tables, surrounded by gas grills that had all been turned on full blast to warm the little tent up. A couple of my friends were practically passed out. We'd been working hard. They had a couple of beers and it was so nice and warm in the tent. After only a few minutes, I too was feeling super tired and a little woozy and stretched out onto a table. The tent got very quiet, and I rolled over to tell a friend that we probably shouldn't fall asleep in here. And then I saw it. The air was wavy like a mirage in the desert, and there were 6 to 7 of us laid out straight on tabletops with arms at our sides like bodies on morgue slabs. And all I could say was, "The gas, get out, the gas, get out," over and over as I struggled to open up the tent flaps. Once the cold outside air rushed into the tent, a couple of the others sat up realizing what was happening. We all stumbled out of the tent. The 2 who had been in there the longest ended up going to the hospital, while me and the others had varying degrees of nausea, headaches, and vomiting. But I don't think college me really put it together in the moment that we had built ourselves a carbon monoxide gas chamber. But when I looked over and saw all of us stretched out on tables like that there was a very calm voice in my head saying, "This is how they'll find your bodies," and it freaked me the F out. Next story. I went to a house party in college with a group of 5 other friends. It was hosted in a lofted apartment, and the whole drive there I kept saying we shouldn't go because I just had this horrible gut feeling something bad was going to happen. An hour later, arriving mid-beer pong game, there was a loud cracking noise and the floor gave out similar to the way the Titanic split in half. Myself and the group I went with all fell 12 feet to the concrete floor below, along with the folding table and a bunch of glass bottles. The only people hurt? Myself and my 2 friends. I remember looking up once I hit the floor and seeing the refrigerator about 2 feet from falling down on top of me. I think I said "I told you so" for the rest of the year. Next story. Wife and I did a road trip down in South New Zealand to a place called Akaroa. It's a cute little French town on the east coast of the South Island. We are fans of hiking, so we parked up at a nearby forest trail and started our walk. It was like 3 p.m. in the afternoon on a beautiful sunny day, but we didn't see a single other person on this track. We're very used to bushwalking in remote places, but at some point during this walk I felt goosebumps and a sense of dread. It was very weird. I haven't felt like that very often. I noticed there were no birds chirping at all either, which felt very odd. It really felt like someone was watching us. At some point I told my wife, "I don't like this feeling, and I think we should cut our hike short and get back to the car," and we both hurried back. Still don't have any explanation for that day, but I can very clearly remember how I felt. Everything in my body was screaming at me to just run around and get back in the car. Next story. In February of 2022, when a neighboring country invaded and began the bombing, my world collapsed. It was the scariest moment of my life. The moment we realized we had to leave our home, maybe forever. I don't think I've ever faced a harder decision or felt such fear and uncertainty. And even now, nothing has truly changed. We've returned to our home, but we live under the shadow of constant, unpredictable bombing, trying to hold on to some sense of normal life in a place that no longer feels safe. Next story. Years ago, I had flown home to Denver and took the shuttle to the parking lot. There weren't a lot of people on this shuttle, but there was this one guy who kept asking me questions, some semi-personal, and I couldn't wait to get off of that shuttle and get away from him. When the driver stopped at my area, I stood up, and then the guy stood up and got off of the shuttle. I had a really bad feeling in my gut, so I stayed on the shuttle and I rode it all the way back to the terminal and back to the parking lot. The driver asked me why I didn't get off of that shuttle, and I told him about the guy, and I had a bad feeling in my gut about him. And he said he always believes those gut feelings. When we finally got back to my area at the park and ride, the shuttle driver waited until I got into my car and backed out before he left. Next story. My husband and I went on a road trip across the province last year, and on the last part of the trip, we booked a hotel for the night because we were too tired to drive, and we checked into the hotel, went to our room, and I immediately felt uncomfortable. Something just wasn't right. Went to use the washroom and the toilet overflowed so much that it went past the bathroom and into the bedroom, so we switched to a different room. Then there were some drunk people out back, blood on the ground in front of our door, and we could hear some woman screaming in the woods behind the hotel. And we saw some guys pull up into a van and unloading hundreds of boxes into the room next to us. I started crying and I said we need to leave. I didn't care that the room was already paid for, and I didn't care how tired I was driving the rest of the way home. 9 hours. Then a week later, there was news reportings of that hotel being used for trafficking women and drugs. I'm so glad that we left that night. Next story. In 2008, in college, my friends and I broke into an old abandoned hotel from the 1930s in Mineral Wells, Texas. It was straight out of a time warp. Out of, I believe, 12 floors, we made it to 3. We went up past the pool. Apparently, the hotel was famous for this because of the minerals in the water that supposedly cured illness, and around the kitchen, and we went around the massive ballroom floor, past the old elevator with the pull gate, where a kid apparently got his head severed, and by lots of old creepy bedrooms with furniture still in them. That's all we passed. Then we heard a noise. A super loud, screeching noise down a hallway that was pitch black. We all shined our lights in that direction, but saw nothing but the sound. It was getting louder and louder, and we all bolted as fast as we could. No clue what it was, but I've never been more terrified in my life. Next story. I've posted this before, but took a train and bus trip around Ireland in '78, was going into Sligo when I had an instant feeling of overwhelming dread. Something I'd never had before or since. It was heavy and oppressive. I just grabbed my stuff and ran across the platform to get to a train going right back out. I eventually ended up in Mullingar, where I had a great stay and dinner with people I met at the B&B, so maybe that was what was supposed to happen for me. And I've never been able to figure this out. Next story. 10 years ago, I'm 20 and I'm in Jamaica, on vacation with a huge group of multiple families celebrating a wedding. One evening, all of the adults, 40 and up, are outside our hotel drinking, and me and 2 of the other young girls go to the beach and we walk along. They are both a little younger than me. Anyway, we're a few hotels worth down the beach when we are approached by a Jamaican man. He starts off casually chatting and is soon pointing down the coast towards the downtown scene. He says, "That is the real Jamaica. You have to check it out." And I immediately knew that he's trying to get us to a second location. I abruptly tell the girls that we should turn around and walk back towards our hotel, and he keeps pace with us. I tell him we don't need a chaperone in a very stern tone, and he sort of laughs and says he doesn't mind and keeps walking with us. And I should point out that the other 2 girls, being younger than me, were both uncomfortable but still stuck in that mindset/conditioning that being polite is tantamount, and they were still trying to keep the peace and chat with them. I was so effing over it, though. But anyway, we're finally about at our hotel, and he's still with us. And at this point, I'm firmly and loudly telling this guy that we have adults super close by, who will be wondering where we are, were we at the hotel, and why aren't we going clubbing with him? Like, I'm pretty loud and insistent. Then, we're approached by a dude who looks young, probably the age I was, 20, white, looks like a tourist. For a moment, I felt relief. He heard me, saw what was happening, and was stepping in. Then he shakes hands and gives a quick bro hug to the Jamaican dude. Oh my god. That moment, I felt flight or fight, and it was time to go. He then introduces himself, and before I have time to react and assert myself, the 2 of them have 1. Tied Rasta bracelets to our wrists, and 2. Pulled out 3 red stripe bottles and uncapped them, handing 1 to each of us. In regards to the bracelets, I vividly remember looking at my wrist and thinking, they've marked us. Well, white dude is chatting with the youngest of us 3, a doe-eyed blonde who is only 17 and nervously laughing and going along with what he's saying, and I stepped back for a moment and say to the other girl very firmly, "We need to get the F away from here." White dude pauses in this friendly conversation voice for a split second to make eye contact with me, and his mask slips. For the tiniest second, pure hatred. At this point, I'm finished letting the other two girls play pretend. I grab both of them, turn around, and yell super loudly behind us, "We aren't interested, go away!" And like I said, the rest of our group wasn't far. They were drinking less than 50 yards away. And I'm not sure how our story would have ended had I been more naive, but I'm also not interested in knowing. Next story. I was in an old apartment building visiting a friend. We were just sitting on the couch when we heard a massive sound like tearing fabric, only 10 times louder. Then we saw a massive horizontal crack instantly appear and run across the ceiling above us, showering us with dust. Then my friend just yelled, "Out now!" and we bolted. It turns out the main support beam above their unit had given way slightly. We stood outside shaking for an hour watching the emergency crew work. Next story. Walking my dog years and years ago at our regular spot and time in my neighborhood after work one evening. We were on the sidewalk in front of the school in the neighborhood, and he was sniffing around, and something in my gut internally screamed, "Cross the street right now." And I have learned to listen to my gut with things like that, and we immediately crossed the street. 30 seconds later, a car came flying down the road, hopped the curb, took out a street sign, and went back down the sidewalk for a few feet before getting back on the road and driving off. Had we not crossed the street, they would have plowed right through us probably, killing us at how fast they were going. Next story. Two buddies and I had just graduated university and were out on the town one night bar hopping. We were feeling no pain from a night of drinking, and while walking back to my apartment at the end of the night, we spotted a pretty wild house party happening. Music playing, people hanging out in the front yard, and the front door open. We walked over and started talking to some guy out front. He invited us in, and we found some beer in the kitchen and started to drink. Now, my one buddy started playing beer pong with this group of women. They had never played before. We were having fun, but the conversations I was trying to have with these people just seemed off. I finally asked the guy that we had met out front if he went to the same university we had just graduated from, and he looked confused. He then told me that he was in high school, and I laughed it off. No way. And as I looked around the house and at the people there, I had this panicked realization. We were officially at a high school party. How did we not realize this walking in? My heart sank and I suddenly felt my stomach drop. I was sick. Here we were with a house full of underage teens drinking in a stranger's house. I felt like I was going to puke, grabbed my buddies, and yanked them out of there. Thankfully, nothing bad happened, and we did get out of there, but to this day, we still laugh about this drunken mix-up. Next story. Climbing a glacier. It's a beautiful day, but we can see clouds on the other side of the mountain, and it sounds like thunder. We get close to our destination, about 150 meters from a rock face we need to pass through, and clouds roll in fast. The temperature drops, and we can't see the rock face we're going towards, so we take a break to see if it blows through. One of our group went up the hill a bit to relieve themselves, and suddenly a bolt of lightning hit the rock face, arcing across the gap that we were planning to go through. Skidded, slipped, and rolled down the glacier to get away from that freaking thing. Next story. I was working in a mall when I was 19 years old, and I remembered one day I was walking to the food court to get something to eat when I heard a gunshot. Everyone stopped for a second, even me. Then people started running towards my direction. And that's when I realized that was an actual gunshot, and I had to get the F out now. So I started to run and left through the emergency exit. Turns out it was gang-on-gang violence, but dumbasses chose to do it inside of a mall. Next story. I had been staying at my boyfriend's at the time's house and needed to pop home to grab some more clothes. As soon as I got inside, I had this overwhelming feeling like the house didn't want me to be there. Nobody was home. It was dark and silent. I ran upstairs, grabbed whatever was closest, and got the F out of there. I remember standing in the doorway looking up at the house with the most immense sense of dread I've ever had. 1 week later, we had my 21st at home. A few strange things happened, one of them being when my sister, cousin, and I were doing our hair, and I smelled what I thought was smoke. My cousin insisted it was just the straightener, so I let it go. Then my grandmother asked if I was cold because it was winter and my dress didn't have sleeves. We were inside, and if I should put the heater on. For some reason, I decided not to, which was very unusual for me. I always have it on in winter. And while this all was happening, on one of the down lights in the main room, it started flickering, which had done periodically for a few weeks, but we never thought much of it. But anyhow, later that night, when all the guests had gone and we were in bed, I woke up to the smoke alarms absolutely blaring. I remember being in denial and tried to tell myself it was the house alarm. It sometimes went off by itself, so I tried to key in the code, but nothing happened. Then, accepting that it was in fact the smoke alarm, I went downstairs thinking, where is this fire? There's no fire here. Sure enough, when I got down there and went to the main room, where all of us had just been, I looked up at the ducted heating vent and saw bright orange flames just frolicking around. It was unreachable. It spread between the two floors and melted a water pipe, making water fall out of the ceiling, which made no sense to me at the time as I just could not process the danger I was in. But we all got outside, including our two dogs and some guests that had stayed, and we saw the whole house burn down. There was an explosion when it reached the gas, and I have never felt such intense, acute terror since then. Later, when the engineer inspected it, he said it started from a faulty downlight and had been smoldering for at least a few days. That explained the smell when we were doing our hair. It explained the flickering light, too, and if I had turned the heater on that night, it would have ignited with all of our guests inside, and who knows what would have happened if I did. So, my house burned down on my 21st. We lost everything. Next story. It was spring of 1998, and I, then 15F, was a high school sophomore. I had an argument with my mother late in the evening and decided to leave the house to take a walk around town to clear my head afterwards. I walked from my suburban neighborhood about 2 miles to downtown and looped around to walk home again. It was around midnight on my way back and about a half mile from home when I noticed a blue pickup truck pass by me slowly a few times along a main street with no other cars around. Once I realized it was the same vehicle after the third time passing me, the primal fear set in. Maybe the driver was lost? No, and I felt my heart racing. My body went numb. When the truck passed by me a fourth time, it didn't stop, but could tell whoever was driving it was definitely scoping me out. And then it drove off again. But I heard it turn around once more over the crest in the hill I was walking up, and I ran for my life behind a building on the main street and into a neighborhood where I chose to trespass into residential property to avoid this person in the truck who was following me. I heard the truck drive by with the engine roaring, accelerating down this small residential street as I hid in the bushes of someone's yard, terrified. The truck began scouting this neighborhood. When it turned into another street away from me, I ran down the block further towards home until I was safe, but shaken by the experience. Then, a little over a year later, a local man named Rex Krebs was arrested and charged with abduction, SA, and murder of 2 young women from the same part of town where I had had my experience of being followed. One of the murder abduction locations was a pedestrian bridge being about 4 blocks from where I hid in the bushes while being followed. The newspaper ran a huge story on the case and included in the article's photos the killer's pickup truck that he used to abduct his 2 victims. The same truck that was following me that one night. Next story. I was sitting in my car after high school one day and feeling like I needed to stop texting and leave. Then I started people running down the street towards me. 3 or 4 people on each side of the street towards me. I bug out and drive like 5 blocks away to call 911, and then I can see that they have guns and are threatening or shooting each other. So then I drive off a second time and I don't stop. But I almost got caught in Crossfire twice in 5 minutes. Next story. It was 2017, 2018 in London. I was in a relationship of about 2 to 3 years. It was a habit that on joint rare days off midweek, different stressful jobs, both self-employed, we would sleep in, get lunch out somewhere nice, then walk in a local park to walk off some calories before heading home for ice cream and Game of Thrones and Narcos, if I remember correctly. Anyway, this day, all going well, we were nearly at the gates to a central London park, and all of a sudden, I had an intuitive response that we shouldn't go further, but was so scared I didn't explain. Just tugged on his hand and tried to yank a person with a 50-pound weight advantage plus 10 inches in height, and he jokingly tugged me the other way when I turned into a stubborn golden retriever and just planted myself. He looked at me as if I was nuts. But we wandered back, about a 20-minute walk. Bit awkward, but I explained once we were further away from the park that something spooked me, and I was utterly terrified. Home, I went for a shower, as was covered in my cold, clammy sweat, dressed in comfies, came into the living room, and the TV was on. News channel. A man had entered the park with a long kitchen knife and stabbed 4 to 5 people, including nearly killing one. Went in via the same gate we were a few hundred meters from. Now, I'm usually very logical, articulate, rational, and can only say thanks to whichever ancient human sense, pattern recognition, or intuition that saved us. Next story. Not really scared, more like a nope moment. I drove for Lyft off and on for about a year, and this was in Charlotte, North Carolina. I took a ride that was in an outlying neighborhood at the airport. So I go to the address, and it's on the road with a few houses, all dark. Streetlights were few and far in between. I get to the address, and I I can't find any house numbers. I pull into the driveway that's listed, wait not even 30 seconds, and get a feeling something isn't right. No house lights come on, no message or call asking to wait. I don't see anyone. So I back out and I leave. Right as I get to the end of the street, I get another ride request from the same location. I declined and got the hell out of there fast. Then, my other story, I was walking home one night. I tried to take what I thought was a shortcut through an industrial park. I lived in the area my whole life. I knew there was a way through but couldn't check as my phone battery was depleted, so I'm walking in what I feel is the right way and get towards the edge of the industrial park. The roads, they keep going, but there are no streetlights there. The road looked like a fairy tale description of what you expect a dark tree-lined road would be. That feeling of a bad idea to travel down that road was so overwhelming that I went back and took the long way home. Next story, in Madrid, at 16 years old, with my strawberry blonde classmate who looked like a Bond girl but with a pixie cut, milky skin covered in strawberry blonde freckles, and wearing short shorts with a tiny shirt that was basically a tank top. She refused everyone's advice and concerns about her standing out as an obvious tourist. It's a very busy area, and we are desperate for American food. We're looking for a fast food chain that we had heard about, and we turned down a side street to get to the door. Well, side street turned out to be an alley, and suddenly we are surrounded by a group of young men talking really fast. The guys are flirty and giving compliments. My friend is flattered by the attention, giggling and batting her eyelashes, but I immediately clocked that they are moving us away from the street and people are trying to separate us from each other. So I go nuclear. I start waving my arms around and I get loud. I grab her and start dragging her back to the street. She's pissed, I'm pissed, but we're still hungry. But she was a typical small-town, spoiled, self-absorbed, naive girl. She believed love was waiting for her and had found her in that alley, and she refused to acknowledge the danger she put us in. Her dumbass never forgave me for saving our lives.
All right, everybody, I am not a fan of OP's friend here. When my dude friends are wearing their booty short shorts and crop tops, I say, hey man, you can't be dressing like that here. This is a school. But you know what? OP's friend is spoiled and she was saved that day, whether she knows it or not. But anyway, OP's a good friend. Next story.
So, for me, it was seeing the second explosion go off at the Boston Marathon bombing. The adrenaline dump was so massive that my brain couldn't form memories for a few moments. It felt like no time at all, and forever, all at once between the bomb and me trying to get inside of the bank I was in front of, which was obviously closed for Marathon Monday. Once I started thinking, I ducked into the nearest alley, figuring it would be a lower likelihood for more bombs, and once there, hunkered down in the deepest doorway I could find to text my family, breathe, and make a plan to get home. Next story, I was a kid meeting my father downtown. Mother was driving and picking him up. She accidentally turned down the wrong street and 6 guys started approaching the vehicle and Mom started freaking out, throwing the car in reverse. They obviously were selling and didn't get aggressive. I remember they looked safe-ish, but my mom was scared out of her mind with little me in the back. We didn't score any cool drugs, but got out of there and found our pickup soon after. Next story, I had a similar experience. I remember leaving class in college in 2010. There was like this girl who I was becoming friends with because we lived fairly close together and take the same back roads to school. Well, one day I was following her on the windy crossroads back home, but something inside me was like, stop at the grocery store, now. So I did. After leaving the store, I saw an accident on the freeway and I avoided it. Then, later that night, a friend let me know on Facebook that my friend got into a car accident and died. Turns out she was directly in front of me for the entire ride home, and when she was merging on the freeway, she was crushed by a semi. If I didn't stop at the store, I would have been right behind her on the freeway, and who knows if I would have avoided the accident or got caught up in it. It was a very sad few weeks. Next story, in my early 20s, first car. Myself and a friend went to a house party held by people that we knew well. The party was great, high vibes, and everyone was having a great time. Then, out of nowhere, I was overcome with a feeling of absolute dread, like a sense of impending doom that was totally impossible to ignore. I told my friend that it was time to go. Now, he looked me in the eyes and didn't hesitate. He said, "Okay, let's go." We both got on our cars and drove away, and when we rounded the corner out of the street, we spotted about 15 cars all parked up on the side of the road. Turned out a local gang who were notorious for crashing parties and literally kidnapping people and torturing them bashing girls as they head down their boyfriends, all sorts of terrible crap like that. This gang had found out about the party and were waiting down the street to raid it. After we left, we heard that the gang had crashed the party, bashed as many guys and girls as they could, kidnapped a couple of people, and even ran over a partygoer as they drove away. A powerful lesson at a young age to trust those gut feelings.
Alright, so OP didn't mention the part where he texted one of the homies at the party and said, hey, get out of there, or hey, let me call the cops. I don't know if OP knew about them at the time, but I don't know, he didn't mention that part, so that's something to think about. But anyway, we have read lots of stories like these on this channel, a lot of camping ones or just these gut-feeling supernatural ones. There is a force in play that we don't really know what it is, but I choose to believe that it's real and maybe we can harness it for oil. I don't really know. We'll just have to keep trying, won't we? Undersparked, the only channel on YouTube trying to harvest oil, I think. Suck it, Mr. Beast. But anyway, guys, we're at the end of the video. I'm spouting complete nonsense, but thank you all so much for watching another video. It means a lot. Have a really good day, and bye-bye!